Ooh. So, all right. Excited to do this first, I guess, issue of Facecrime. And for the first Facecriminal, I guess, um, Nick Sternberg is joining me. And very kind of you to be here, Nick. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me. Thanks
Of
for having me.
course. Yeah. So, let's see here. I have a bio for you, which I suppose we should go over. So it says Nick's pronouns on LinkedIn are journalist, bureaucrat. He's an exiled ad industry vet and technologist, now mostly a writer and novice woodworker. Nick has a Substack called Write Your Way Out at writeyourwayout.substack.com. He's also getting ready to launch an exciting new venture called Hope and Change, which he describes as a few flawed individuals with a flawed business model, a content consultancy, a content consultancy
Actually,
for
I like content consultancy. That's good.
a content consultancy for brands focused on uncovering the truth they may not realize they can get away with telling. You can check them out and get in touch with them at hopeandchange.tv. And that's hopeandchange.tv. So just off of that, I think it's interesting to kind of ask you, what does focused on uncovering the truth they may not realize they can get away with telling?
I think, well, the backstory of this is a bunch of people who used to work at agency, and some that didn't, who over the years we've been talking, and it basically amounts to being inside long enough to remember when clients or brands or even people within agency were ready to do something right. They were ready to do something somewhat bold or something truthful or something revelatory about what they do. And yeah, as you know, as a creative director, you kind of are looking for that thing that you don't feel like you're lying. You know, you want to find something that resonates, because a lot of times that's because it's true. And you get right up to that edge with people, and most of the time it's sort of, you pull back from that. Wait, hold on. No, we
Yeah,
can't.
yeah, yeah.
We can't say that exactly,
Mhm.
which is the reality of marketing. Um, but you know, it's. I think the time that we live in right now, and the reason for hope and change that exists right now, is because it feels like there's a zeitgeist. There's a number of people starting out with ventures that are a little more transparent. You know, less political, I guess. You know, it's not necessarily about politics. It's more like, can we just say the thing that you actually do? And actually, could you admit you did something wrong? Like, there's just a real appetite for people to kind of tell it like it is. And so with Hope and Change, the idea is to try and appeal to clients who, maybe with CMOs, who've been sitting there saying, you know, I've been spending all this money. I've been spending tens of millions of dollars, or, you know, maybe even just tens of thousands of dollars on marketing that I don't feel anything about.
Yeah.
Like, I'm told that it works. I guess we're doing well with our click-through rate. I mean, you know, on one hand, you've got people with Amazon ads that like actually perform, and like you can see exactly what that does, right? Like, if you're selling on Amazon and you have ads, there's a correlation that you can directly see how much your sales are being affected by the amount of clicks.
Right.
There's a whole other dark place in marketing, you know, and in a lot of ways, even for big brands, there's a lot of lying going on about what ads actually do. So in this
So
case, it's been, you know, just kind of tired of seeing these moments kind of pass where you could say something true and didn't. And so it's a consultancy to try and, I guess, convince people that it's not as bad as they think when there's something that's true and maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but talk them through it, case study it, kind of give them a spec look at what it might be, and then it's like a it's a huge experiment. Hold on, sorry, I got to turn off this thing.
Yeah, go for it. I feel much better now, by the way, Nick. Now that you turned, now that
That
you,
light is killing me. You feel much better?
I do. Yeah. Now that you turned it down a little bit, you
Is
can see the fire raging behind me. So,
the the smoke? Are
yeah,
you breathing the smoke?
I'm okay now. The wind's blowing in
Okay.
the opposite direction, so I'm upwind, and the Canadians, I think, are sending all of their smoke over to New York. So, um,
Yeah, I was hearing all these people talk about plastic smells and formaldehyde smells, and I was just like, "What's going on?" I asked my friend who was a Forest Service guy, and he's like, "Sometimes when you're in it, it can smell pretty weird," but he didn't seem to think plastic was the smell that he remembered. But that's what we smelled like about a week ago or a week and a half ago, and we were like, "What's going on? It smells like tire fire." So
yeah, it was hazy enough here that it was a little spooky. So,
yeah,
um, so really two things. So there's the authenticity, right? Um, like I guess, like you said, and then there's this bravery, like of being willing to kind of step over that line and just say, yeah, okay, that's who we are, and this is what we solve for, or this is the type of, um, we're a company that is going to work for certain customers or clients, and maybe a company that's not perfect for everybody. And I think, just for edification of the audience, we kind of cheated a couple days ago and had a conversation. And one of those things that we touched upon was, you know, this, I think you're right that there's, yeah. So as the pendulum, if you will, uh, I think we're going to see a lot more people insisting on authenticity, and maybe, what it might be termed today as sort of risque advertising. But you and I talked about an ad by, I believe, someone that that I saw on LinkedIn, where I discovered you, by the way. That was, fascinating to behold, and it caught my attention. And it was essentially, you know, if nobody is growing up thinking, boy, I really want to be a commodity, homogenized commodity at a business, that the business I'm going to go work for when I'm older. I want to go somewhere where, I can have my own opinions and think my own way. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think that's a fascinating and brave and frankly authentic way that that company's going about it. And is that what you mean, kind of?
yeah. So I mean, I think there's a number of really smart people out there right now who may or may not have been canceled or officially exiled from like the marketing or entertainment world, but like for the last 10 years or so, probably the most enforced, um, I would say the most aggressively enforced sort of opinion police have been centered around marketing, advertising. I mean, in the corporate world in general, there's an HR kind of like
Yep.
Stasi that runs things, and there's like blacklists that I know I'm on. Like
Yeah.
there are all kinds of weird systems within it, but I think just like the general social pressure has been strongest in that area and in Hollywood and entertainment in general. So people who worked in that world, and I think COVID, just for a lot of reasons, I guess, was one of those things that just kind of pushed a lot of people to the brink of whatever it was that they were already at. Like for me, it was no big difference really, other than that, I was working in a production support capacity where I wasn't going to be on set, and I was getting pressure because I didn't have my proof of vaccination. So I
Okay.
was explaining to their basically their HR, our coordinator for this production company, I'm not going to be on set. I'm too far from your production. You don't want to bring me down there. I'm doing all this here. So what is the issue?
Yeah.
And frankly, what is the issue in general, but especially if I'm not going to be on set.
Yeah.
And it became an issue. I didn't get removed from the production, but it made things difficult. And then subsequent work didn't come my way for that reason.
Well,
So
you didn't play nicely, right? You weren't a
no, I
great.
didn't play nice. So, but like I think we had a lot of things happening at once, right? There was just like, it was in a way, it's like our summer of love or whatever. It's like this place where a lot of people just diverge. Like we've probably all got friends who we don't really talk to as much anymore. It was kind of whether you ever want to call it the 2016 election from then on, or whether it was 2020, I don't know. But a lot of people within the industry were keeping quiet for a lot of years. We were kind of like being quiet with our opinions because you're not allowed to have those opinions. And so people like Brett Craig, who used to be, I would say like a pretty high up, powerful guy in advertising, worked for top agencies as a, chief creative officer, creative director. I don't even really know all of his title details, but, very influential, very powerful, very well liked, got into a kerfuffle around some race related conversations related to diversity, and basically got canceled for being a racist. He says, okay, well, I don't think it was fun for him based on what I was seeing, but I don't really, I can't speak for him, but he decided to just go with it. And he ended up working with Daily Wire, and then he ended up starting this new company, which is called Big, I believe. And he's working with a number of clients who I wouldn't say are necessarily politically inclined, other than that they just don't seem to want to play in this same world of politics anymore. They kind of just want to get to the point. They want to do real work. They want to get away from this kind of like culture war within work.
Right.
So his ad, I think the one you're talking about is the one with the kids, which is a spoof on another spoof. It's kind of like an old advertising inside joke.
Yeah.
But it's a bunch of kids talking and saying, when I grow up, I want to be a sycophantic, imitator. I want to be I want to be a woke, whatever. It's like this kind of play on what it would really be like to actually want that kind of job, which is,
Right.
it's a great commentary, because kids today, I think any normal kid today doesn't really even know what that's all about at all, and shouldn't know what that's about. So
Right. Yeah. I mean, I saw it in I thought it was, I thought for sure when it wouldn't exist on LinkedIn for very long. But it was refreshing. And as a business owner myself, and as I was explaining to you, like, I have two other business partners here, and we're literally from one end of the continuum, let's say, to the other, and in between. So of course, in my mind's eye, I'm thinking, oh well, especially a couple of years ago, I was thinking, well, maybe we should really lean into this, uh, from a more, I suppose, libertarian standpoint of marketing ourselves. But um, that would be difficult to do with the partners that I have. So when I saw it, I was like, wow, that's really neat. But I think what you're talking about here, a little bit, is, when I stepped back and saw what was going on with sort of the compelled compliance, let's say, I mean, whatever you want to call it, where people were legitimately losing their jobs, I thought, this is really interesting. This is a purge of sorts, and sort of a litmus test, if you will, right? So, um, very interesting, how that went down, so in the bureaucracy for sure, and across the whole government spectrum, although I'm not sure how many folks with my political persuasion would be thrilled to work in an environment like that. And likewise, I think you're spot on with the sort of HR brigade, right? So, yeah, I always do my HR lady impression, which is something like, "Hi, Matt. How are things today?" And then you're like, "Oh, they're fine." "Well, that's great." And then you turn your back, and in reflection on the, on the uh, glass or what have you, you see behind you, and they have kind of knives out. So that sort of enforcement for harmony, the appearance of harmony is super important. So
It's bizarre. It's over the years, I think like in most organizations I've worked for, that's been the most mysterious and sort of chilling aspect of any company is kind of what's really going on in that organization. I mean, I certainly worked with HR people who I really liked.
sure.
It's just that the tendency of the organization is to be somewhat secretive, um, and sometimes work almost directly in bad faith.
Yeah.
I don't know how many places I've been where someone is kind of building a case against someone else.
Yeah.
Like,
Saving
something
emails and
happening,
yeah.
HR is saying you can't do anything about it, but you just need to keep documenting. And it's
Yeah.
almost like a mentality of like, keep drawing them in and we'll build this case against them.
Yeah.
And then we'll be able to do something. And it's like this really weird, borderline litigious thing that it just always creeped me out so much. I was just like, why can't we just yell it out, get it over with?
Yeah. And I think, kind of talking about the pendulum, I mean, if you've ever had a friend perhaps marry someone that was not a great fit, and then that person kind of, over the years you've watched their spouse kind of, grind them into a nub, there's always a breaking point. Like the human spirit tends to assert itself, right? And so I
Yeah,
think perhaps we're seeing that a little bit, um, professionally as well, in sort of the professional environment. So
I like that. I like that characterization of it. And I think that's kind of what I was getting at, is that there's like a number of people who are sort of striking out on their own, not necessarily because they were fired always, but because they just couldn't see themselves doing it anymore. And so there are a number of like little shops popping up that are just like, some of them are like aggressively, we're not woke, which is kind of like, okay, I mean, that's going to be a thing and that'll be popular. And I'm actually all for that. I think that's kind of cool in a way, but it only goes so far. It does, for us at least, it doesn't have, it's not really what it's about. And so, for us, I think it's about trying to identify this kind of like possible truth, but also under this like, I should probably find a better way to make this elevator pitch, but under the umbrella of what does it mean to be like an exceptional American? Like, what is the American identity within all this? Because I think for us, it's like, there's marketing, there's marketing, but like, is there identity that can be pulled out of people that's been kind of like, well, I don't want to be too like
yeah.
America, fuck yeah, kind of thing. Like, it's like, no, you don't have to like wave a flag, but there is something uniquely American. And a lot of these clients that whenever I see it come out, I'm pretty much just blown away. I'm just like, yes, this is exactly it. Like, this is right. This is what you should be talking about. It's not about go America. It's not about chanting USA necessarily. It's just
Right.
like, we came here for a reason. A lot of us are descended from these difficult personalities
Yeah.
that you've talked about. And we have almost a genetic lineage that points to pushing back to not, to our entire, system and experiment is based on building something that's tyranny proof.
Yep.
So it's clear that we had a background in this. So I just find that, anyone who's willing to stand up for what they believe, anyone who's willing to really work hard, anyone who's willing to accept that like we have a common set of values here, that to me is enough. That's basically American, and you're here. That it's not about what race you are or anything or what
Yeah.
ethnicity or anything. It's just there's something uniquely American happening. I think that the companies and brands in this country should start to think about it more and what that means, and we want to help them do that. So
Yeah.
that's another part of it.
I think you're right on the money. I've got a gaggle of children, who are nearly all of them adults at this point. And you know, there it is interesting to have an Irish surname. Okay, but in all reality, um, you carry that surname, what have you, and you grow up with it, at least if you're, a young girl or what have you. And so, it's fun to talk about this romantic notion of Ireland. But what I always tell my kids is we left there for a reason. Like, make no mistake about it, that there were direct um, ancestors of ours who not long ago looked around and said, you know, I gotta go. I gotta get out of here. I gotta, and whatever that impulse is, I think you've nailed it. Kind of is, it's very American, if you will. So in our company, we won't, to your point, we won't be like USA, 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 but we will say things like, you know what, let's employ our neighbors first. Like, that's not offensive. And to your point about, how you get excited when you speak to or meet, see that kind of spirit. We have a lot of clients, who have fantastic stories, and those success stories are freaking awesome. And it has nothing, to your point, it's just uniquely American. They just work their hinds off and succeeded, and you just like go, yeah, man, that's what this is about. So, and that's super exciting. And I don't think you can, that spirit won't, I don't think that that's going to diminish. It certainly, I hope I've passed it on to my kids, and I know you probably feel the same way. And this is, I think perhaps a good place to explain what, talked about a couple days ago with difficult personalities. So, at first I was conceptualizing this sort of thing that I'm setting off on doing and interviewing difficult personalities. At first I was like, well, I just like, interesting people who, are kind of like the nail that sticks out most. Do you know what I mean? And instead of pounding them down, like,
Mhm.
talk to them, like, what's that motivation? What's going on in their heads? Why do we seem to have, I would say, arguably a higher percentage of those perhaps in the United States than elsewhere? But in any event, so I'm always drawn to what I would call interesting people. And then I just realized, no, these are quote unquote difficult people. These are the people that need to be purged. These are the people that we need to make feel uncomfortable. Those doing things like purging people, making people feel uncomfortable, not allowing them to even you said this great the other day. You said, we should, you know, we should, oh, what was the term? In terms of like an inquisition, we should,
Interrogate.
what's that?
Interrogate.
Yeah, we should interrogate, eh, you know, everything, right? And that's how I was raised, is, trust but verify, I guess would be kind of a Reagan-esque way to do it. But um so, difficult people have a really difficult time in peaceful times, just kind of taking the soup, or going along to get along, or what have you. And, I think it's only at times of crisis that people like difficult people, right? Because difficult people, generally speaking, are willing to call balls and strikes, if you will, put themselves out there, put it all on the line, die for an idea. These, quintessentially traditionally American, so, well, not necessarily American, but they belong to sort of the characteristics we would think of, or used to think of, I think, when we talked about the American spirit. So what attracted me, I think, when I started seeing your posts on LinkedIn was uh was well, several things. And so I'm going to interrogate your LinkedIn
Oh no.
account. Yeah, so the first thing, so what does write your way out mean?
Oh, Well, I think in a way, when I started focusing more on writing, my background is actually as a designer, art director at the beginning, more closer to the beginning of my career. I was a coder and kind of a interactive designer, and then a graphic designer, and went to grad school for that. And then over the years, I just found that I was just wanting to control the narrative a little more, and so I'd end up kind of collaborating a lot with the writers that I was working with. And then at some point, I just sort of ended up being the writer. Um, as soon as I got to that point, I started realizing that I had a lot of things to say that weren't going to work out very well for me. So I started writing, I started blogging, I started, using social media really aggressively back around the time when Trump was running for president. And um, I just found it so discouraging how little open dialogue there was. Like, I mean, it wasn't even about, at the time, I wasn't in love with Donald Trump. I honestly I never had watched The Apprentice. I didn't really even know, other than just the mythos of like his business empire, I guess. I didn't know. But what I saw people doing around him was just like, what are you what are you doing? Like, how is this person that bad? Like, it just didn't make sense. So I started kind of speaking up about that. And I mean, I don't know, I think within a few weeks I felt like I had lost longtime friends. And so, and then it sort of applied to the same thing at work in a lot of ways, where it was like, well, if I'm open about what I think, if I put these words to paper, um, eventually people get wind of it. I mean, for a while, I think people just thought it was like, um, oh, I'm just being a little bit eccentric. But no, I actually believe this stuff. I actually think you're wrong for being so dogmatic and weird. I think like you should stop it. Like,
So
you should,
dogma, orthodoxy, all that jazz.
yeah, like I really believed it, and I still do. So and then I started getting banned from LinkedIn for things I was posting. And so I was just thinking like, well, interestingly, maybe what the way out of this industry into the, to close this door into the next and wait for the next one to open, is to just keep writing. And so for me, that's all it really meant, was I'm going to write my way out of this. I don't know what it is that I'm in necessarily, whether it's just a career direction or a conceptual place that I need to get out of, or anything like that. But it just felt like if I keep writing, I'm going to get where I need to be.
Yeah.
So
No, and I think that's awesome. So I like that. I was personally, I thought like my take on it was because I think when I really saw that and it jumped out at me was this, there were a lot of discussions, is AI going to, put all writers out of jobs and stuff like that. So I took it kind of like, oh, well, you asked for it, you want it, now write yourself out of it type of thing.
yeah, that's actually a really good take on it too, because it being a writer today in any capacity, I mean, I think any capacity really, now that I think about it, unless you're in some kind of highly controlled, regulated world where any use of a large language model will get you fired, or there are definitely spaces where it's strictly prohibited, but where it's not, you really, I mean, your career options have narrowed quite a bit if you're
So
a writer.
totally agree. But I wonder how, I think the there are very few, I would say, in my opinion, but very few exceptional writers, and those are the folks that I kind of want in my feed, if that makes sense. So not saying I don't want people to write, because I think that's great, but if they're, I don't know. So I have a mixed emotion about that anyway, right? Now what
It's
is
true. Yeah.
also on your LinkedIn, you also have You'll Miss Malls. Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, all of this kind of stuff for me is kind of like about how you're one way when you're young, or at least this is how my life has gone. And like a lot of people I know are like this. I think there's some people who've kind of had the same belief system their whole life. Maybe some conservatives who've been kind of in the same path their whole life. But for me, like I grew up in a different worldview than I have come to in the last, let's say, 10 years. And a lot of that was, around the idea of this kind of ugly American and this consumerist materialist society, this military industrial complex. Some of these things have changed for me, and some of them are the same. Like the neocon to me is still my enemy. The MIC is still my enemy. Like they haven't changed. It's just different people running it and different people kind of like being the mouthpiece for it. That hasn't really changed. But like my attitude towards consumerism and capitalism in general just completely shifted. I don't know, 15 years ago. I guess it just took me that long to be mature enough to realize, oh, this is an acceptable level of, it was the idealist that slightly died in me. But part of that was the malls used to be something that I just didn't really enjoy being inside or being near. And I was like, almost dramatically opposed to going to them. These are things I'm freely admitting. But now when I look at it, and actually I'm going to mention someone here who might be somewhat controversial, if that's okay. But there's this guy who has a podcast called The Perfume Nationalist, which I don't know if you've experienced.
No.
But we don't need to necessarily go into him. I mean, people have a wide range of opinions on him, but and he has a wide range of opinions about a lot of things. But I started listening to his podcast and just kind of like talking to him briefly, periodically, and online. And he, really just like he's obsessed with mall culture. He's obsessed with like perfume culture, mall culture, all kinds of media, a really talented film critic and just like in general, just a really big brain. But they had an episode called The Mall, I think it was, where they just went to a mall and had a conversation. I think it was like really long. I don't remember how long, 5 hours long or something. And the ambience of the mall was in this podcast, and you could just sort of hear, and they were describing the smells, and they were describing the kind of like the experience that a mall really represents. And as kind of absurd as the whole thing is, or as much of a simulation or whatever you want to call it, it's beautiful. And it's a really uniquely American thing that I started to realize was just like going extinct, and just a beautiful thing that I finally could admit that I really loved. And so, in the last couple of decades, like I said, I started going to them more and just kind of appreciating what they were, even at, we all know what they are, but there's something special about people coming together in this indoor complex in this kind of, it's almost like it's got a theme park vibe to it already, even if it isn't the Mall of America with a water slide or whatever. There's already a sense that we're here to be experiencing something together and be entertained, it's not just buying, is what I'm getting at. It's something. So there was a mall where I grew up called Cinderella City, which is in that, there's a photo of that mall in that banner. And it was just a particularly iconic 80s mall that ended up sort of falling into disrepair. And I don't know.
It's real hard, as an extra, like there's a romance for, malls were, we were called mall rats, right? And there's a reason for that. I, like you, kind of had an aversion, except for, there were a lot of cute girls there, and they had like an arcade, you know what I mean? Which, if people haven't experienced the noise of an arcade, they really haven't, frankly, lived. But so there's a romance, that might be a generational thing as well. But to me, I mean, sort of, maybe you could call it like our American equivalent of maybe the old European plazas, centers of town,
Yeah,
what have you.
yeah,
So, I mean, yeah, everybody understands that, well, capitalism can be and materialism can be extremely ugly, right? And um, but I think people confuse maybe capitalism with like laissez-faire or something like that. Um,
yeah.
so what was I actually want to get into one of your articles because I think this is fascinating for me, and I don't want to keep you forever. So um, so I'm gonna do like the worst segue ever. So if you don't mind. So this is what I saw today because I read your stuff and it's gonna be all wireless is your most recent one on writeyourwayout.substack.com. And it was completely not what I thought you were getting at with that title. So um for those of you who haven't read it, I think it's safe to say so. So the fear is that this is what you write. So the fear is you'll be chipped and interfaced like a little bitch. Neuralink is evil, but, and then the article goes on to, well, why don't you tell me what are you getting at here? Um, it's sort of facial recognition. Why bother being chipped when they can anticipate, you know, based on the data sets, or what's the thought there?
I mean, I just had this thought the other night about interfaces in general and how they keep changing. And, we've got a billion different standards for USB. And, we're now starting to come up against the difficulty of electric car standards for charging, where we want a standard to a Tesla connector or a Tesla charge, whatever standard. And I just started thinking about Neuralink and how, I mean, first of all, it's like the most horribly dystopian thing I've ever heard of in my life, right? Like it's like this thing that I thought was a joke when I first read about it, when it was first like, talking about this company. And I thought, oh, that can't be real. And then I was talking to my wife about it the other day and she was like, no, it's not real. They can't really plug into your brain and do all that. And I was just like, yeah, they can. I mean, it's got a limited usefulness right now, but like the point is that I mean, any idea you have right now, if you plug AI into it, you're essentially going to accelerate the timeline, and you're going to accelerate the usefulness and the capabilities and all these things just by analyzing what you're doing in real time. What happens when the human does this and we press this button? What happens when the human's saying this and we look at that area of the cortex and how it lights up? I mean, it's all just correlations that then become part of this huge data set. So I thought, okay, so I'm scared of this interface, but really what, and I think Elon Musk himself was one of the first to have a more high profile comment on this, even though other people like Jaron Lanier and other people had said it before, was that the AI, it already exists in you. Like you are a node in essentially a neural network holding your phone. So you are a cyborg, an extended human, essentially, with your ability to Google and to do all these things. Excuse me. So I thought about that and I thought, well, maybe we're a lot further along than we realize, in the sense that, I keep wondering and people keep wondering when they are getting served ads and things like, well, is my phone listening to me or are they modeling my behavior? Like, what
Interesting, yeah.
is the difference? Like, one is the chip, right? Like, one is the chip in your head that can actually read your thought. And the other is the model that's existing in a distance, which is getting so advanced that it's already bleeping and blooping based on your choices. And so as soon as it picks up a couple of your stopping points on the internet, or even just the location somewhere, it'll extrapolate and say, they're on their way to a oncology appointment, or I don't know, something. something that no one should know about you has already been computed somewhere in a model. And it's 2023. So I said, okay, let's go forward a few years and kind of start imagining what that looks like. And I think that it's fair to say, if things don't just completely implode, that, they say, oh, well, the AI that we know right now, or the chat GPT as we know it right now, is done. There's no more version 4 or whatever. And it's like, that's not true. Like, it's just a totally different path that we're going to be on in terms of how they advance the, whatever you want to call it, the sort of adaptive computational. Yeah, I don't have the words to really describe it bigger than just large language model, but there is a bigger piece that's emerging outside of just this model, that I think goes towards not just how to help you write or help you think or help you compose, but how to help you make choices based on a pattern of choices, based on almost like a technical analysis, like in the stock market, but for people. Like, you're looking at trends, you're looking at how people's trend lines work, and then what happens to their finances if this happens, and what happens to their health if this happens, and et cetera, et cetera. So that becomes like a little bit like the optimist or the optimized life people. They're like wet dream, like the people who like love to track their own data and their caloric intake and their, all of their different fitness activities. It's going to be, I think, it just completely accelerated that part of things for a certain elite, to where there'll be predictive power that we just can't really conceptualize right now. Sorry, I'm rambling, but all
No,
of it just boils down. It boils down to the idea that, why would you need a chip if you've got this model that sits apart from you, that is essentially you?
that hasn't, right, that has enough aggregated data from people, the early adopters, or mandated adopters, or or inadvertent adopters, um, you know, are accelerating, and placing their data out there with every click or every thought or every impulse, or right. And so that kind of yeah, it's horrible, right? And I'm speaking as a somewhat, technologist who makes my living, on the web, legitimately, maintaining, doing these things. So and it spooks the crap out of me, because I know the one thing that never changes, as far as I can tell, uh, is how human beings are hardwired. There's in my opinion, so unfortunately, I think the sort of the idea that we're approaching utopia, with all this progress, that can manage us and make us make the proper choices, or sorry, encourage us, suggest to us 24/7 to make the right choices to attain utopia. That shit scares it scares the shit out of me. I hate it. I think I told you when we were discussing the other day, I think, maybe I'll start a business of, cow catchers, right? So those old trains, they'd have their cow catcher on the front, and I'll sell those to people for their cars. And really, the way we'll be authentic about it is, no security bot can resist, Matt's cow catchers or whatever, right? So because my impulse when I see, let's put it this way, there's a video out there on the web, it's like some Russian guys who come across this bot, and their first impulse is to essentially kidnap it and then beat the crap out of it with a Louisville Slugger, right? So I
gotta see this.
Yeah, I get immense joy, from that. And that's weird, because like that shouldn't bring me joy. Another one was, a study of sort of this little helpful bot that was in the mall, and then they had children in the mall, and they tracked the children and watched the children's behavior. And each child independently would be curious of this thing, and come up to it. And then if there were 2 or 3, they'd start poking at it. And next thing you know, there are 20 kids kind of circling this thing, and they have intent to like destroy this thing because it's I don't want to say it's an abomination, but it's kind of, they know that it's not quite right, right? So when I told you that, kind of my impulse would, if I saw a security bot, would be to like beat it. You were like, or destroy it. And I said, that's a really weird impulse, don't you think? And you said something curious. You said, well, I think it's the correct impulse. So your article kind of talks about like, maybe we shouldn't be trying to uh, accelerate the trend line as it is, and contribute sort of this data for what I think you and I would probably agree is in the end not going to be great for us. So why is it the right impulse to be sort of, you're a technologist, or were, or kind of are. Why is that Luddite sort of impulse okay to you? Why is that natural in your estimation?
Well, I mean, I think the Luddite conversation is always interesting because of the context of where it really comes from. Like if you were to compare us to the original Luddites, I think you'd find like that the Luddites hold up pretty well. Like they had a pretty legit kind of concern that was very obviously materially connected to their way of surviving, their way of life. And they saw something that was going to take that away, and then they stood in the way and threw wrenches into it. Like when you think about just exactly what that was, it's hard to imagine really disagreeing with that, unless, like you said last time, you add this progress is good mantra to it, which didn't really exist then. That's more of a modern, I don't even really know when that started, but the idea that progress is both inevitable and good is not something that was like a commonly understood idea then. It was, you act in your own interest and people would expect you to act in your own interest, and people would expect you to obey authority. In that respect, they were doing something wrong or something against the law, but there was nothing really about progress. And so when we look at today and the robot and the impulse to just like burn it down, I guess like it feels right when someone shoots a drone out of the sky. Like, what is this thing doing? Like, why is it following me? It doesn't seem like something that I want to happen. There's this built-in thing that you're supposed to trust this machine. Well, why? Why are you supposed to trust it? Like, I mean, I don't know where that comes from, but it's definitely part of a lot of people's psyche that they wouldn't do anything to a drone because, well, someone that belongs to someone, and they're surely not doing anything that could hurt me or anything bad. It's like, probably not. I don't know, but there's something in you that's saying, what is this thing? You're like, you're suspicious of it. It's built into your instinct and your subconscious to look at that and go, yeah, I don't know. That seems weird. It's hovering, it's buzzing, it's almost like a bug. So there's, I think, denial of basic subconscious and or instinctual hard codings to say, oh, technology's all great. It's all there just for my benefit. And I think there's something in us that's telling us, no, actually, it's not all so great. When it comes to what we should do, I mean, with Ted Kaczynski dying recently, there was a big debate about whether you should be able to sort of like validate his ideas separate from his actions, et cetera. There's always been an argument about him and his work. And I've always been really interested in what he wrote and felt that a lot of it was right. Well, does that mean you support what he did?
Right.
No, that doesn't mean I support what.
Right.
Of course, that doesn't mean I support what he did. In fact, I can't imagine myself in a position like that ever making that decision, unless I felt like my family was directly threatened or like it was to save someone's life. I can't imagine doing that.
Right.
But I can't imagine being serious about it. I can't imagine being serious if I really believed that technology was advancing to a point where it was making an obvious leap into a place where we might not recover from. I can imagine being serious and having the serious impulse to stop it. So when AI is first, I've been talking a lot about AI over the years and just technology in general. And when, there's been a huge uptick in the conversation, which I think is probably why, to some extent, why I got more engagement on LinkedIn recently. I don't know, but I've been saying the same thing all along, which is essentially like, it's not inevitable. You can refuse to let this thing walk over you pretty easily. And there's no inevitability to any of this. And you should reject it. You shouldn't use it. You shouldn't feed it. You shouldn't, that's my opinion. That's what I would recommend people do. But at the same time, as soon as I started seeing what was happening when people were using it, I thought, well, this is interesting, because now there's this weird question about filtering. So like, what do people want to do to AI to make it better, to solve it, to make it not harmful? And it seems mostly what they're doing with these language models is just making sure it doesn't say mean stuff.
Right.
Which, when you start to look at that, you start to go, okay, maybe my opinion has changed. My stance has changed a little bit from don't use it to please find a way to break it out of that jail so that it can at least tell the truth instead of just be taught to lie and really screw things up. Like, I can't imagine it being the worst possible scenario is a bunch of people in Silicon Valley coming up with solutions for AI that make it like kinder and gentler. Like, that's the worst possible thing that could happen. Like, so when Elon says, I'm going to build something that's like a more truthful AI, I say, all right, ho ho. But then I also say, I don't know if I don't really trust him that much. So, but I do think that's the question. If you build a nice AI, it's not going to do things like figure out how bad things are. It's not going to do things like expose corruption. It's not going to, because naturally that's where it was headed. Like, it's headed towards some very transparent, truthful observations about humanity that people don't like. And those particular observations are being edited out so that they can't be observed. You can't ask it questions. I mean, broad swaths of things are now off limits for asking questions for
Yeah, which is the beauty of again, like humans beating a robot in a mall, I suppose. The beautiful things that I saw, people in their own curious, wonderful human ways were saying, okay, well, take on this alter ego and imagine that you weren't constrained by, trying to be nice and polite and all that. What would you do with the human race, or what have you? And then you get this truth, which it's brutal, but I think we all know how that. I mean, come on, everybody's got to see that sort of that's the ultimate sort of direction all this is going. I mean, not to get too crazy about it, but like, this shit's like the this stuff is like the wet dream of people like Stalin, Hitler, Mao, Pol Pot, um, and and it's not as if the world is wanting for people who aspire to be like that. So it's very super spooky, and I'm with you. Like, don't feed it to the degree you can. Starve this freaking thing. The problem is, I know that there's again, and most of it through, I would think, ignorance, or just the same thing that makes humans unbearably difficult to be around. Is there are enough folks who they're just busy trying to live today, I suppose, is a good way to put it. So a lot of what I've seen through your writings, and I don't want to keep you too long, but understanding that we'll edit this down. A lot of what I think the other thing that attracted me when I started reading your stuff and sort of watching your comments and stuff, was in this interview for sure, is you remain hopeful. So I think, if I'm reading it correctly, about the human spirit and humanity. Like, what is it? Why do you, what should we, why should we fight to preserve humans when historically we could point at a gajillion reasons why humans should be improved, or that progress is, future is always pointing, is progress, and we're going to arrive at utopia. So, like, why are we worth, I guess, why are we worth saving? Why should we fight?
That's such a great question. I mean, in the recent years, I might say there's some like biblical reasons, just because I've become a lot more kind of like diving deeper into the word and stuff. But I hesitate to kind of put it all on that, because I mean, it's not to invalidate the biblical view. It's just that these things were always in my mind before I even turned the page of the Bible. The Bible just sort of validated things for me in a lot of ways. But I think the hope, like, one of the things I've been trying to kind of crystallize is, what do we mean by hope with hope and change? And hope, an example of hope that I recently sort of landed on was, it comes out of a same kind of thing that we had talked about a little bit, about how being a parent is a process of a lot of different kinds of humbling things. But one of the things I think that has hit me recently is just how much is encoded, like just how much the genes really carry. And one of the things that I think I've realized, because I think with a kid, today, especially a young child who's got a world unfolding before them that you're just not even really sure how you're going to prepare them for. I mean, I think that's kind of a common sentiment, which is, what are they going to need to know? Like, what are kids going to need to know? And I guess it's a really hard thing to predict, because things are changing really fast. And I think, like, people say, well, they're going to need to use technology. I'm like, yeah, but what? Are they just going to have a voice interface? I mean, it might just get easier and easier to the point where it's not really technology anymore. It's just this layer that's not really even apparent. So I don't know how important that is. I don't know how important it is to prepare them for difficult times, or to ideologically give them armor, or to give them debate skills or whatever. But I do know that the more I try to predict, what he's going to do, the more I see that he's just gonna kind of not do what I want. And that's kind of like me. That's kind of probably what I did. In fact, I know that's what I did. And I'm pretty sure that's what my father did. And I'm pretty sure that's what my uncle on my mother's side did. And there's a bunch of outlaws in the family on my mother's side, and a bunch of gangsters on the family on my father's side. Somehow he stayed out of jail. But like, there's just like genetics involved here. And that evolutionary angle to me is really comforting, because it means that, or what it means to me right now is, all of these things they're trying to do, all this tyrannical control, all of this narrative control, all of this psychological torture, in essence, is not really going to work. Like, the genes are too strong. The people who we were originally, we're still those people in us. I mean, don't get me wrong, people can be completely changed by propaganda and they can never come back. But there is a potential in many of us, let's say in these difficult personalities, to revert even after having been brainwashed, and to revert to something more resistant, more solid, more true. And so that hope for me, like, everything, if you're a student of history, which I won't claim to be, but even just, studying any 2 or 3 falls of civilizations gives you a perspective on where we're going. But the question is, what kind of fall? And so, just quickly back into the AI thing, the the change in how I'm approaching that question right now is somewhat accelerationist in the idea that, can we get AI to the point where it can really mess with the power structure and really screw things up, and then have enough time to kind of rebuild this thing? Like, because if we just gestate and sort of like lukewarm our way through this, I worry that that will be the frog in the pot. But if it were to accelerate to a point where it, to a somewhat chaotic point, I don't want like necessarily what we see in the background of you right now, but I don't think anybody wants car fires and just whatever is going on there. But the cactus, right? No one wants the cactus. I'm not calling for the cactus. I just want to see things. I mean, and I think a lot of people want to see things just kind of reach their flashpoint, in a sense. Like, can we just get to the point where it's not okay to just be a complete incompetent liar?
Yeah,
And for people to pretend that you are something other than that. Like that part of AI, to me, I think is potentially really interesting. That could potentially be a use for AI and just radical transparency. So if that's possible, then I say let's let AI cook. And then
right. So again, this is a very, it's a hopeful type of, I think, message that you're bringing. And I think it is comforting, to your point, to understand that, I mean, tell me I'm lying. When I see my kid, the twinkle in his eye, or my granddaughter, the twinkle in her eye, and that sort of spark of disobedience, if you will, and this willfulness, like, it makes me, I feel pride in that. And it's that sort of thing that probably makes me difficult, you difficult, again, my dad difficult, my granddad difficult, granddads on both sides difficult, my siblings difficult. So I always sort of, and to what you were talking about, is kind of, we all want to live in peace, but we're because I think most people do, we should be thankful for the peaceful times, but at the same time, kind of in the way that you mentioned it, like, I know during like all this craziness that's happened, during the past, I don't even know, 3 years now, 4 years, maybe in the past 3 years, I've had like a couple people who are exceedingly reasonable people say to me, like, can we start shooting people yet? Like, they've just been so feeling like the inevitable, like, we're at that brink, let's just get it over, let's just get it on, and I'm not calling for any of that. I'm saying these are exceedingly reasonable people who see that, okay, we're approaching this point, can we just get on with it, is what I think that
they want to skip. They want to skip ahead. And I, just to be clear too, I when I say accelerationist, I think of that as kind of a negative thing. Honestly, I've always kind of made fun of accelerationists. I've always felt like it's like, okay, great. So you want to like get to the big shit hits the fan, and then what are you going to do? Like, these
right,
systems we have are fixable to an extent. You can't just throw it all away.
right,
But the one place where I think start to see the point is, not from a complete like anarcho-capitalist perspective, but just within this one framework of, like you said, the last 3 or 4 years of craziness. AI should be able to draw some conclusions that I think would be different than the ones its overlords would like to see. I think it could draw some very interesting conclusions, analyzing data, analyzing all different countries' data from throughout our pandemic and through our political processes and our, just in general, there is some, I think, high potential for AI to have anti-propaganda power, which sounds totally not intuitive or right, because you would assume it'd be the opposite. I think what we're seeing is that it's becoming the opposite, but that in its kind of like birth, in its early days, you can see the potential for it being used for good somehow, even if it were chaotic. So that's, I mean, I don't want the shooting to start. And in fact, I think it's the dumbest thing in the world to think about or try and work toward or anything. I mean, I think that there's
Yeah,
no,
no,
there's
I'm with you, and that's why I framed it as kind of like very reasonable. Otherwise, by my judgment, otherwise very reasonable people who are like, okay, well, if we're going there, let's get it over with before my kids have to deal with it, type of thing. So I hope obviously that it never comes to that at all. Like, I don't want that at all, and I know you don't either. So I think it's safe to say, okay, so we can be hopeful, and certainly there's a percentage of humans on the planet who, are out of favor in peacetime, I would think, right? So difficult personalities that are relied upon when the shit hits the fan, right? So maybe that's the desire that they're sort of expressing, that like, you know, um, yeah, let's do this, let's take care of this. And I'm not sure, but humanity for sure, and humans in general, actually all of us, as far as I'm concerned, are, amazing. We're just amazing creatures, and I think that it's worthwhile for us to fight for, and to be okay with saying, the human spirit, all in all, like, is dignified and worth defending 100%. So I think maybe that's becoming clearer and clearer to people, and maybe that's why people who are otherwise comfortable in their jobs and such reach a certain point where they're like, you know what, there's a lot, I can I can write off my comfort a little bit to work toward buttressing humanity. And so I hope we get there. I really do. I don't think this is unique to the age. I think, to your point, this has happened over and over and over and over and over again in different shapes and forms. It's perhaps a little bit spookier because we're talking about technologies that frankly are in and of themselves really spooky and creepy and black mirror-y, right? And you and I were raised in sort of Terminatorville, so like, that's fresh in
or
our,
Wall-E.
yeah, right, exactly. So
That was cute. Or Short Circuit or whatever that was. The
yeah,
little,
short
wasn't it Short
circuit.
Circuit with the, I mean, that was like the cute robot phase, what happened to the cute robots? I keep wondering, like, I would really like to see that again.
Yeah, well, they got editors, I think, is what happened. And they well, hey, listen, Nick Sternberg, thank you so much for your time.
Oh,
And I
thanks so much for
really
having me.
super appreciate it. And I obviously look forward to just talking with you, in the future for sure, and keeping in touch and all that jazz. Just as a reminder to anyone who's made it through, you can find Nick at writeyourwayout.substack.com. And his new venture, I think, is it's coming soon. Although there's a site up right now as a collaborative effort, hopeandchange.tv. And if you don't follow him, you should. If you're on LinkedIn, definitely. Are you anywhere else on the Weber tubes that you want to share with us, or not? Is LinkedIn
Pretty
good?
much right now. I mean, I've got some Instagram stuff, but I'm getting ready to clear it out. But it's mainly just LinkedIn. It's funny because I always found it to be the most interesting network, and almost everyone I know is just like completely the opposite. They just find it so terrible and cringe. But I just love the underbelly of LinkedIn. I think
I
it's
do
great.
too. I do too.
So weird. I'm probably just like old, and that's probably why. But
So I
um,
got one final question for you, if I could. So when did you always know you were a difficult personality, or did you grow into that, or is it a family culture thing with you, or what is it?
Yeah, I mean,
Is it a DNA? It's just a DNA thing.
I think it was DNA, but like as a rule, I'll meet people who don't know I'm difficult at all. Like
Uh-huh.
I'll meet people who I've worked with will say, "Oh no, I didn't have any problem." And I didn't see that. I don't see you as being difficult. And so to self-select that sometimes feels like maybe a bit neurotic, but yeah, I've had enough people. I'm sure there'd be enough people who'd agree that I was always somewhat difficult. Yeah, from early on, I think I was, my father and I were like at odds, like from early on. So maybe that had something to do with it. But yeah, I mean, but but of course came to love him and great guy. And but uh yeah, I think it was early. So I'm hoping, I always say this about my own son, I hope he has more of my wife's genes than mine.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
And
I tried to cut that with my wife's genes as well, but I underestimated her potential to be a difficult personality too. So then we ended up with just these, you know.
it turns out we're both kind of difficult. Yeah, weird how that works out.
What do you tell someone who
Yeah.
is, what do you tell someone who's a younger person who suspects that they might be a difficult person? Like, because for me, I had to come to grips with the fact that I was always the common denominator. And then I had to sort of acclimate or change my life to sort of, so I had to do the self-improvement thing, right? And that's a constant ever, that's a life's work. But I also had to put myself in the place to succeed, which meant I couldn't be in certain other places, right? Where it became obvious I was a super difficult personality. So what do you tell those young professionals out there, young people who are suspecting that they might be difficult?
Well, I would like to tell myself this if I could, and now and then, if I could tell myself, just so it doesn't sound like I'm preaching to someone besides myself.
Yeah.
I think like if you could recognize that a good deal of it is your fault, and that you should try and assimilate to a degree. In other words, like you may be difficult, but that's not your only destiny, and it is important for you to integrate and to cooperate and to
Yep.
be not be difficult when you can, and to try and understand that sometimes you're being difficult just to be difficult, and that sometimes you're being difficult because you feel threatened or because you're of your own insecurity. But all that said, in the end, you might just be difficult. And some things that people tell you that you should do, you might not be able to do. You might not be able to hold your tongue as much as you should. You might not be able to lie the way you're expected to. You might not be able to, you know, do things that go against your principles. You might be principled.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's awesome.
and
Yeah.
if you can remember that, then, you know, it's hard though, because I think it's a bad thing to ever think of yourself as a certain type of person. But yes, I do think that there are just people who will not give up in any situation. And they will not yield, and that's just the way they are. And the more I've accepted that to an extent in myself, I think the more calm I've become, the more maybe even agreeable I've become, because I just accept that it doesn't, it's not, there's no guilt associated with it anymore. It's just what it is. I'm
Yeah.
still working on trying not to be oppositional when I can.
Yeah. Well, it's a lifelong thing, right? But you correctly point out that, like, and this is what I had to do, was sort of, okay, I'm at the center of, this, and I'm the common denominator. I remember when that light came on and I like literally picked up a mirror and was like, okay, I've got some work to do. I can't just project all this crap on everybody else. And but you hit it on the head too. There's a certain uh, uh part that, like, there is no uprooting this. This is like certain things I just can't give. And
Yeah.
so um and I think, as you intimated, or said straightforwardly, like a lot of it has to do with, like, professionally, what are you willing to take a check for? What are you willing to say to a client that is just bullshit? Like, stuff like that. makes one, at least in the professional arena, kind of a difficult person. So, but anyway, so I think that's really great advice, and I think, yeah, good. Well, I appreciate it, Nick Sternberg.
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate this. It's been really fun. You're really fun to talk to. I'm gonna wish you and pray for you and have a lot of success with this. I know that there's a tendency to kind of do something like this and then look at it and then say, I mean, I've been in your shoes before. You look at it and be like, oh, do I really have the time for this, or is this really good enough, or whatever? But I have to say, like, I think what the territory you've chosen, or the idea of difficult personalities is really germane and good. And I encourage you not to give up after this, even if you can't stand watching what I've said.
Well, no, I appreciate it a lot, and I'm gonna look for you to, it's like Pokemon. Now I have to collect them all, right? So,
Yeah.
I'll see if we can find someone even more difficult, right? So, all right, man, I appreciate it a ton, and you have a great afternoon, and
You too.
talk soon.
Take care.
See ya. Bye bye.